Everyone. It's a very special sacred day today, and we're celebrating the legacy of our teacher, Hazrat Inayat Khan. And I'm speaking English today, especially because we have many people watching this on Zoom. So I hope that's okay with everyone, that this first part only with our esteemed speaker, Shaikh Mahmood, and also with Paul Ketelaar, will be in English. But the second part of the program, which will be the music part, will not be on Zoom. So we will hopefully send a video recording of the musical part later. Okay, so let us first begin together with the Sufi invocation. We'll do it in English and in Dutch. First in Dutch. Tot de eeuwige, de volmaaktheid van liefde, harmonie en schoonheid. Het enige is, verenigd met alle verlichte zielen, die de lichaming vormen van de meester, de geest van leiding. Toward one, the perfection of love, harmony and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the Master, the Spirit of our guidance. So I'd like to begin with sharing some words from Pirzia, who sent us a message to our celebration that we could take in this wonderful gathering. Greetings to you, dear fellow Murids of Hazrat Inayat Khan. The anniversary of a passing might seem a sad occasion, but even as February 5th marks the day of our beloved teacher's departure from this physical world, it is by no means marking the end of the presence and the guidance that flows from his being towards humanity and in fact towards the whole of the earth community. Murshid told his American Murids as he was leaving in 1926 that he would be closer to them than ever before, even as he disappeared from their eyes. They would find him, he said, in themselves. And it is surely within us to this very day, on this very special day, that we can look and find his smile, his light, his joy, and his peace within ourselves. And the glimmering as well of all that is beautiful and transformative in our world. So today there are celebrations in person and here online, all around the world. And of course, Pirzia is in India at the moment, along with many Murids from around the world, celebrating at Murshid's Dargah. But of course that's been going on for some days now, and it will continue as he leaves Delhi to go to Baroda, where there will be also a live streaming, hopefully from there on Thursday. Baroda, as many of you will know, is the birthplace of Hazrat Inayat Khan. So they will be planning some wonderful samas there, Indian music for people to listen to. But just to say briefly before introducing our esteemed guest speaker, that on Friday, this past Friday, there was a very special sacred consecration of these two new maqams, which are shrines of Murshid Abu Hashim Madani, who was, of course, as you know, the Murshid of Pure Murshid Hazrat Inayat Khan, as well as of Pirzadi Boronisa Inayat Khan, his daughter. So that's a new happening that just took place on Friday in New Delhi by the And so, of course, it's thanks to the very hard work of Dr. Farida Ali and her team, who have overseen the building of these maqams, and also to the Muhammad Ali Khan Stichting, helping with funding the building and so forth. So there's a lot to be grateful for. And if we're able to go in the future to India to visit this. So, well, yes. So it is my deep joy right now to welcome our wonderful, beloved teacher and guide and friend, Shaikh Mahmood Khan, who is the nephew of Hazrat Inayat Khan, to speak with us. And I know he is so sought after these days, very busy, so we're really privileged and grateful that he would come to speak with us today. So let us welcome him.
Dear fellow Marines of Hazrat Khan and those friends who are the admirers of his work, let me in the first place thank Sam for the introduction. And of course we unite in spirit with all our fellow Marines all over the world, and not particularly maybe the people led by Izia who are present. So, on a solemn occasion, and this occasion is celebrating the fulfillment of the earthly life and teachings of Hazrat Khan, and therefore a cause for gratitude, and to that extent a cause for celebration as well. Now, of course, there was a lot to be said, and I'm afraid I had the bad reputation that once I start talking, I never end. So, of course, there is never an end to Sufism, to yours. But anyway, in order to discipline myself in the limited time we have today, I thought I would read to you a memory, which is the oldest memory of Hazrat Khan after his arrival in the West. This was written by an American Murid who met Murshid and was initiated as early as 1911. So that was a very, very long time. And she wrote this article on the occasion of the celebration of 40 years of Sufism. And that was in 1950. And then there were all kinds of celebrations, including the publication of a little memorial volume. In that she contributed a brief article, which I think is the most attractive one, because it's written in beautiful English. She doesn't be a professional writer of some kind, but also makes a number of points which otherwise might have easily passed over. So it's worth taking notice of this beautiful little piece. And we, of course, you have to also see how she, in the first place, takes this question of accepting Murshid as an initiator into Sufism, and then later comes into, no doubt through influences of Europe in those days, where the theosophical course of spiritual speculation was very strong. Then later on she comes into that concept, that particular way in which the concept of message and messenger was being developed by the theosophists. Murshid Khan's first book, as you know, which was published in 1913, not yet when the experience took place in America. That was, he called that book the Sufi Message of Spiritual Liberty. But then later on, that idea of Sufi message took very much a turn in a different direction. Why was this? Because in the West generally, and in Europe, mysticism was of course familiar as a personal element in certain great figures. Of course, the first person who springs to mind is Meister Eckhart, but with many of them during the centuries, but as individual personalities. There was not a tradition of consistent mode of transferring teaching and transferring mysticism throughout the generations. That's what they totally knew. They didn't know anything about it. So what happened in those days, and again, learning the theosophists who were already on that course, they kind of translated that idea of a mystical teaching into a religious one, which in a sense is of course exactly the opposite of what mysticism is about, which seeks from developing from mysticism, from religion as a collective series of values from which we start out. And mind you, Sufism is very much an theistic form of mysticism into the contemplative life of the individual, from the collective to the individual development. But as it was in those days, the 1920s, it was exactly the focus on the collective expression, a different direction. And you will find therefore these two nuances in this piece. On the first place, the person who tells about her muridhood, her early experience of Murshid as a teacher, and then suddenly also transits into this further development as given in those days. Today it's again no longer the same as it used to be then. But then again, a translation of a religious concept of individual development into a mystical concept of individual development into a religious one of a kind of general dispensation of values. So there you find this in this piece as one of the characteristics. There are many more ones which are very interesting. It's a little piece which really repays close analysis. But I won't go into that now. I'll just read this piece to you, and I hope it will also bring a bell with you, because the sense which he developed of how people reacted to Murshid's teaching and his personality is, I think, brought out beautifully, and is value for murids of every generation anew. The piece is called, and mind you, it's written in 1950, not for this Hazrat Day, but for Hazrat Day. Hazrat Day, 13th of September, which, as you know, marks the two departures, the one of Inayat from Baroda in 1910, and in 1926 his return to India. These are the two Hazrats which are commemorated as that day, on that day. Munir Anon writes, an old murid remembers. On September 13th, 1910, Pir Murshid Hazrat Inayat Khan sailed from India, a living lamb whose rays were even then reaching a slumbering Western world. His brother, the late Shaikh ul-Mashaikh Mahmood Khan, and his cousin, our representative General Pir Muhammad Ali Khan, accompanied him. That same week, my own life began to change, so radically that I did not recognize myself. A new wisdom guided my action. Sometimes it seemed to be altogether a dream. A year later to the week, my old life fell suddenly apart, and as a direct consequence, I met Murshid. 6 days later, I was initiated. In those bygone days, when the earth bloomed where he passed, I do not recall hearing much talk of the message. I had merely become, as I understood it, a disciple of Sufism. During the few weeks before I had to leave New York and to leave Murshid, I learned little about its teachings, for nothing had been written at that time. I was amazed when, long afterwards, I learned of the incredible wealth of teaching gathered up in the esoteric papers, of the beautifully written books to illuminate our way. I wonder sometimes if we are all grateful enough for this treasure. It was a prodigious work he achieved for us in his few days on earth. It surprised me also to discover that later murids must have protested at having to devote a half-hour daily to practices. I protested too, but in those old days, my evening practice alone required over 2 hours. All that I received of Sufism, with the exception of 4 stories, was communicated by Moshe's presence. On the current of the breath, as we say now, Moshe's presence talking of life in general. Now and then a point of metaphysics was explained, and these were the moments when, in my spiritual backwardness, I felt I was really getting something. All Murids know the stories Moshe told me. The boy who could not learn Alif and fled into the jungle. The young Murid who was not scandalized when his worship went to worship in the temple of the goddess Kali. And, of course, the epic love of Layla and Majnun. For the Murid of Moshe's own day ever hears those names without seeing the ecstatic look of the great Moshe when telling them. During these first weeks away from my Moshe, weeks that were destined to stretch into 11 years, there occurred what seemed to me, even then, something short of a miracle. I had done no mystical and no philosophical reading up to that time, and a gift copy of Emerson's essays had been opened once and put back to languish on the shelf. It was meaningless. But now, one evening, I picked it up again. Dawn was breaking when I laid it down. Another devotee. How had I failed so utterly to understand? His words seemed now to blaze with meaning, and the word illumination clarified the experience for me. These were the first fruits of Bay'ah, of initiation into Sufism. I was privileged to dine several times in the home of Hazrat before I went away. What was probably the supreme blessing of my entire life occurred on one of these unforgettable occasions. I did not know that the glance of a seer falling upon a person could confer the greatest grace. So, when I chanced to look over that evening and meet the glance of my Murshid, I did not even faintly suspect what a divine impression had been made on my ignorant heart. And yet, it must have been so. For long years afterwards, while doing a certain practice, I suddenly saw again, in memory, my Murshid sitting across from me at dinner, looking at me as he had looked so long ago. Every night thereafter, I summoned up that picture, and one night, as I rested in the benediction of that compassionate glance, a deep stillness fell upon me. And at that blissful instant, I realized whose dinner guest I had been. I saw then that in those earliest days, when I had no idea that I'd ever or could be any messenger but Jesus, I was, even then, in the very presence of the messenger of today. Even then, though he was just 29, Hazrat's full destiny was upon him. Once, I must have said something that caused him to ask, his eyes twinkling, "But how old do you think your Murshid is?" I said, politely, thinking him much older, "Oh, in the 40s. And Murshid was 29. And he laughed. How he could laugh. I regarded him more closely. And then, no, not a mark of time. What had deceived me was the divine manner, akhlaq Allah, the weight borne by the message bearer, always lent him a majesty of presence that touched even his youth. A picture of those early times that did not include a glimpse of the Master's lifelong companions would be incomplete. Mahmood Khan, I heard his beloved voice calling them to share some moment. They must always share everything. And those two were an unending source of amazement to me. Here were two greatly talented young men, fine musicians, quite young, and yet they had only one thought in the world, Hazrat. It was obvious that he was their very being. It seemed so unnatural. Why? They look at him, and they hang upon his words as if he were God. I protested inwardly. He is lovable, but what is so remarkable about him? This phenomenon must have provoked me to make some comment, forgotten now, but I recall his brother's reply. He is a perfect man. No one is perfect, and we both laughed. Since then, they have both had to shoulder the cross, to stand firm against those forces that are fiercest when the light is brightest. The selflessness that I once deplored has provided the great channels through which the messenger guides the message on its earthly way. That was the memory of Munir Anon, and I must say every paragraph deserves a certain discussion, a certain analysis, and a certain comment. You see this transition to that concept of, again, reinterpreting mysticism in religious terms, which in a way, it is in a way standing it on its head, but that was, as I said, the tradition of the times. People did not know mysticism as a continuous schooling in the inward path. So the only thing they could do, and as I said, the philosophers were really leaders in this, the only thing they could do was interpreting mysticism in religious terms. And as I read again, Sufism is a theistic form of mysticism. You need that religious background, but yet that passage from the dualist, let us say the dualist attitude towards divine reality into the contemplative attitude of unifying with it is a very different direction. So as I said, today we look back on this tradition as it worked in Sufism in those days. Let us not forget that it's 1 century ago now that this happened, and this particular piece was written in 1911. And as you heard from this piece, Mahmood Khan, the youngest brother, had not yet arrived from India. And we know that he arrived in February 1912, which means that this piece must have been written, Murshid still was 29, so it would have been her experiences, Munir Anon's experiences, would have gone from, let's say, September 1911 up till maybe the end of the year, something like that. So a very, very early piece indeed, with so many different elements which, well, continue their memory for so much. I mean, it contains so much familiar to us and yet unfamiliar, because it has a freshness, a certain kind of newness about it. And as I say, the presentation is a very striking one. If any of you have any questions about this lecture, this theme, and now I think if we have time, the floor is still open for you to pose whatever question you would like. And well, that's therefore a possibility now. What strikes me in this piece also is the felicity of expression. Who starts an article like this? Moshe Inayat Khan sailed from India, a living lamp whose rays, even then, were reaching a slumbering Western world. Well, that gives a beautiful literary kind of expression of what Moshe Inayat Khan set out for. In those bygone days, when the earth bloomed where he passed, I do not recall much talk about the message, and really become, as I understood it, a disciple of Sufism. Well, that's of course what Sufism is about. That is what is the essence of Sufism, of that inward development in the contemplative life. I learned little about its teachings, for nothing had been written then. So there was that living transmission from the teacher to the pupil, from the Moshe to the Murid, without any further elaboration that could remind one of Moshe, what Moshe had said, without also a points of departure which would illustrate which Moshe's teaching would have further developed. And as he rightly says, as she rightly says, I was amazed when long afterwards I learned of the incredible wealth of teaching gathered up in the esoteric papers, of the beautifully written books to illuminate our way. I wonder sometimes if we are all grateful enough for this treasure. It was a prodigious work he achieved for us in these few days on earth. Now that, of course, is very striking up to this day. I cannot recommend enough to each murid to acquaint himself or herself with those teachings, and always remembering that teachings are not textbooks. They are poetic evocations, but Moshe never abandoned the style, which was his typical Indian style of communicating. And moreover, he was a musician, accustomed to write his own melodies, his own verses for his songs. So that poetic, evocative style, that is what one first has to become aware of. Don't expect, as I said, textbooks which give you a number of rules and regulations and tell you in clear terms what exactly, well, Moshe's work is full of, extremely clear, great clarity, but attune yourself to that particular mood of poetic insight, of that evocative force which speaks from this text. And then you find them at its most inspiring. And for those of you who have little time, nowadays life is so overfilled. Again, I repeat, these texts are 100 years old today. But if one has no time for reading, accustom yourself in the first place to the Gain Badanichtan, these short passages, which, and once one is accustomed to, in a short passage, already to, so to speak, breathe the spirit of Moshe Inayat's mystical vision, then it becomes much easier also when you read a book, just to find a paragraph or just a few lines of a particular chapter, which contains the very essence of that chapter, and which in that way you can, again, breathe into your being and carry along in your heart and feel illuminated and uplifted by that which Moshe expresses with such mastery in just a few words. Lectures may be long, the essence of the lecture may be just hidden somewhere in such a lecture. Sometimes in the beginning, sometimes at the end, and sometimes somewhere hidden in the middle. Not always, but in many cases you will find that somewhere there is that essential meaning of a lecture hidden away in that text. And that again is journey of discovery in itself is enormous charm and of enormous inspiring force. And today, of course, she speaks about the teaching that we're not yet there in her day. Today we have that great privilege of the complete works, the so-called Negbach edition of the works. They are an enormous step forward for both Murids who are really looking for a more advanced comprehension and experience of Moshe's teachings, but at the same time for outsiders who have a more complete look on the thematic development and a more analytic comprehension of multilateral teaching. This work is really priceless. In general, when we speak of multilateral teachings, it is helpful to divide them in different categories. Just let me mention that because many of you will be having a number of these books and the reference to them is not always very easy. So we have developed this habit of referring to them by the person mainly responsible for their editing. That's not really always consistent, but it is a very practical thing. For instance, the early series of books published from England, maybe many of you maybe know them, that is brown, small volumes, beautifully printed, and this brown kind of bindings, and they were largely in the care, published by Miss Dolan, and herself a very gifted writer in the early days, and so we call that the Nargis edition, the brown English series, which go up till the Purpose of Life, which was published in Geneva but still belong to that series. That we call the Nargis edition, the first brown books. Then the second edition is a very well-known one and today a very prized one. Those are the small thematic books published by Kluwer in the Netherlands. That great Kluwer, they made a special company which published Hazrat Nafran's books. One of the Kluwer members was a very prominent Sufi Murid in those days. So he published these beautiful orange books of the Kluwer edition, with few re-editions after the war. Then we get, of course, this so-called not the complete works, but the Sufi message of Inayat in the 1960s, which published by Kuzunawas from Palland. So that's the Palland. So we have Nargas edition, Kluwer edition, the Palland edition, which is very comprehensive and textually the most beautiful series we have, and because it also hangs together. And then finally, of course, the Negbach edition, which is a complete chronological series of verbatim texts. Nowadays, it's most practical to start your reading with either the Kluwer single volumes or the Palland edition. But of course, when you go further, then this Negbach edition is an incredible source of not just information, but inspiration as to everything which Moshe had left to us. And now it is high time to stop. I think I really managed to use more time than I was really meant to. So my apologies for the organizers of this event. But after all, they are not accustomed to it. So am I.
Thank you so much.
Nog steeds zit al een apology. Oh, well, you might as well give me a cactus. To punish me for my lateness. Thank you very much.
Always so inspiring. Yes, and we're so privileged that you come and speak to us. So thank you so much. So before we continue, can the people who are online hear okay? Because I think we've been getting some messages that the sound was not okay.
A bit like this.
Okay, I don't know what to do about it.
Well, it depends, it's just the space between the microphone
And the speaker.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we do our best. And so I'd like to introduce our next speaker, and this is Paul Ketelaar, who is the conservator of the Sufi Museum upstairs, which you are all invited to go upstairs after his introduction. And for those of you who are online, I hope to be able to take you with me by bringing my phone, and then probably I have to log onto another internet connection upstairs, so bear with me if it seems like you're offline and then you're online again. But I want to introduce Paul, who has done tremendous work together with his team in creating this beautiful space for us to visit, for the future generations to come, to appreciate the odyssey of Hazrat Inayat Khan and his whole journey to the West, and the many beautiful points along the journey that are highlighted upstairs. And well, in addition, I want to also say that Paul has done amazing work in the compilation of the Sufipedia. I heard that some people never heard of this before, and it's amazing what he's put together on the internet with all this historical information about Hazrat Inayat Khan and the family and the Murids who are here in Holland. And you can look this up. It's so rich and amazing work as a historian that he has compiled this for us. So without further ado, I'd like just to invite Paul to join us here now and share with us your introduction to the layout of the land upstairs in the Sufi Museum.
Usually when I get such an introduction, thank you, Zachary, for inviting me to this afternoon and giving me the privilege of telling something about the museum. But usually when I get such an introduction, my first reaction is I want to run away. What can I do to... Okay, so welcome everybody. I just have a quick question. Which one of you has never been to the museum before, upstairs? And the rest has already paid a visit? Wonderful, wonderful. And of course the people around the globe, they can't react, but all welcome to come to Holland. So the museum that's now located upstairs at the Annapolonenstraat was, before it was the house of Amin Karp. He lived there for many, many years. And before that, in the 50s and 60s, it was the studio of the artist Saïda Willebeke-Lemaire, who was the wife of Van Tuyl van Zeeuwskerken, Baron Van Tuyl van Zeeuwskerken. And the items of the museum and its archive have been there now for 3-4 years, from 2019. And before that, it was at the former house of Murshid Ashyazdi at Bond Street number 24. And it was then already called a museum, but it was much more in an informal style. And we have tried to redesign everything with showcases and with all kinds of, these posters on the wall explaining everything. So we had a dilemma, Saki and I. Would I go upstairs with you and give you a guided tour? Because we didn't know how many people there would be. If there would have been 50, even with this amount of people, it's difficult, and you would have to go in groups. So, and the other thing was that I would give an introduction, and we chose for that, and then you can all go upstairs. Maybe first you can have some tea or have a break, but then you can go upstairs, and I can tell you that the museum is both self-explanatory, because there are a lot of posters on the wall telling the story, and the setup of the museum is chronological, which means that it starts in the first room with the history of India, the ancestors of Murshid, and all the items that he gathered in that time when he was in India. And then as you go over the threshold to the big hall, then the whole hall is dedicated to Murshid's travels, which of course starts in the United States, and then he moves on to London for a short period, then he goes to France, and then he goes to Russia, and then he goes back to London during the World War I, and after that, in the 1921, he moves with his family to France. So everything is also indicated by plates on the wall, stating in what phase of his life at that point you are. And then we have also a corner with beautiful, beautiful statues and busts made mostly by Charlotte van Palland, a very Dutch famous sculptress, and she was also a Sufi, as was her sister and the brother, and she made beautiful portraits of Murshid and the three brothers. So you're all welcome to go and have a look. And then as you circle around the middle of the room, you'll see two showcases which have all kinds of items from Murshid and the three brothers in separate showcases. And you'll recognize it because their portraits are hanging over the showcase. So you can see which items belong to which family member. So there are a few items that we are, of course, every item in these rooms is very precious, wonderful, and it's to your own taste which one you like best. But we're also very proud of a few items. The oldest items, I think the oldest item is a newly discovered item, which is the Quran of Murshid Madani. It was in the archives of the SIFS, an organization guarding the legacy of the couple van Tuyl van Seerskerken, the previous owners of this building. And in the 1965, Munira van Forst van Beest traveled to India, and she visited a granddaughter of Murshid Madani, and she was given this precious Quran. And then a very kind Indian man helped her wrapping it up to send it to Holland, because she wanted to give to Sayyid van Tuyl. And he put some paper over it, more like tissues, and a very thin thread, and it had to go to Holland, in an aeroplane or a boat. But miraculously, it survived the travel, and it came here, and it was given to Saida, and she put it in the archives here, and now we have it as a display at the museum. So that's, I think, one of the old. It must be like 1860 or 1870. This Quran, so very old. And we also have, which I think is also very wonderful, a notebook of Murshid from the 1913-1914. So that would have been the period that it was in Russia. And it's a notebook that I can't read because it's in Gujarati, as I am informed well. So Pirzia had a look, and his wife, I think she reads and speaks Gujarati, so they helped a little. And I also think that at some point, when the museum was not here, that Mahmoud's wife, Harunisa, she also translated a part of it. Yeah, so we still have to go into that. Okay, coming to all these wonderful people, the contributors to the museum, all the items were gathered and were given from brother to brother. When one brother died, all the possessions went to the other. So a lot of eventually ended up at the Bond Street, where Musharraf and Shazadi lived. And when when Musharraf passed away, she sort of had the idea to found a museum, to have all these items preserved and being available to the public to enjoy them. So when Shazadi herself passed away in 1995, before that she lived in an old age home 2 years before that, and then she donated the whole house to two stichtings, two foundations, one of them being the Sufi Museum. So it has been there for over 25 years, and then 4 years ago it moved to the Annapolona Street upstairs. And I hope you will enjoy going going through the rooms, and please don't mind my introduction if you want to just go from here to there and go backwards. It's all fine. If you have any questions, please ask me, because I think I'll be upstairs answering anything that you would like to know. I think that's it. Is that enough, Saki?
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I'll say something still.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. So, very exciting, huh? So it'll be wonderful to go upstairs. So actually we have our tea break at 4 o'clock, and it's not yet 4. So, but you're very welcome to go upstairs and browse there. For the people who are looking online, I will try to bring my telephone up there now because it's a different internet connection. But we meet back here at 4:30. Please do not bring tea into this room or any beverages. I make chai, so it's there for you as well. But at 4:30 we will begin with the musical part of our program. Okay, so see you soon. Okay, so
Ik zie er geen die dat boek vindt. Maybe my telephone will remember. Thank you. Also, we could keep it on then.